Welcome to Public Life. I'm your host, Michelle Lavoie. My guest was born in Ottawa and moved to Halifax with her family just after the Second World War. She trained as a ballet dancer for most of her youth and had a privileged upbringing as the daughter of a progressive and very successful businessman who had social democratic values. She inherited her passion for politics from both her mother and father. Her father ran unsuccessfully 4 times for the CCF and the NDP. She earned a master's degree in social work, and at 36 years old, she became the first woman to lead a recognized political party in Canada. In '81, she won the NDP seat for Nova Scotia, where she was the only NDP and the only woman in the House of Assembly. She was re-elected 3 times. In 1995, she moved to the federal arena and won the NDP leadership. She became the Member of Parliament for Halifax in 1997, where she led the fight for health care and was the voice for the poor and disadvantaged, until she stepped down as leader in 2002. She is now Foreign Affairs critic for the New Democratic Party. My guest is Alexa McDonough. Welcome, Alexa.
Thank you very much.
You chose the Rideau Canal and the National Arts Centre in Ottawa as a backdrop for this interview. Can you tell me what the arts mean to you?
Well, I think the arts are about the soul of the nation, really, but I also think this is a beautiful setting on the canal, which is a very central point in Ottawa. I happen to live just off the canal. For me, it's thrilling to be able to walk 4 blocks from my back door to the Arts Centre for an evening of music or dance or theatre and walk back home. It's also just a stone's throw from Parliament Hill.
Now, you trained as a ballet dancer for a good part of your youth. Did you have hopes of doing that professionally?
No, never. I worked hard at it. I suppose I enjoyed proving that even though I wasn't really cut out to be a dancer, there was an opportunity for everybody to do something they loved, and particularly enjoyed the character dancing, the ethnic dancing, the folk dancing, Spanish dancing. I did a lot of Spanish dancing, had a wonderful Latvian ballet teacher who was a big force in my life, really. And I come from a family of artists, I mean visual artists, dancers, musicians, actors, but don't think anyone ever had any illusions that I was going to be a ballerina. I just wasn't cut out for that.
There's been much said about your privileged upbringing. Now, your father was a very successful businessman. He took over the brick factory from his father, yet they were very progressive. Both your parents were involved in politics and with first the CCF and then the NDP. What roles did they play?
You know, neither of my parents ever saw any contradiction between being involved in the world of business and being involved in the world of progressive politics. Quite literally, my parents went to a political convention on their honeymoon, so I guess it was in the genes, so to speak. As you say, my dad ran 4 times for the party, was never elected, but didn't think of it as a failure. It was just a building process, and I think I inherited some of that from my dad. And I was born in Ottawa because my dad was the first researcher for the CCF caucus in the early 40s. So obviously they had a big effect on my life. It's also true that my mother was very much an artist. She graduated from the Massachusetts College of Art. And in some ways, I guess my parents kind of typified the symbol of the social democratic movement, which has always been bread and roses. My father was very much involved in the world of creating jobs, of improving working conditions for not just his own employees, but fighting for changes in the law that would do that. And my mom was a huge enthusiast of the arts, patron of the arts, herself a very talented artist, although, as with many women in her generation, didn't have a chance to really truly fulfill herself in the arts, and some of that, I think the frustration of that, she channeled into supporting other young artists and encouraging me to be involved in the world of the arts as well.
And you started your activism at a young age. At 14, you saw something that concerned you in Africville, the black ghetto in Halifax, and you wanted to do something. You and your friends wanted to do something about that. What did you do exactly?
Well, my parents were very involved in the human rights movement in the broad sense of the word, and they were also very involved in the community work of our church. It was during the period when there was increasing attention to the South African apartheid atrocities. And I remember my mom was one of the youth group leaders when we had a speaker come in and talk to us about how unacceptable the South African apartheid system was. And it occurred to us, it wasn't me, it was a group of us, that this was, of course, a great concern, should be of concern to Canadians, but surely it should be of no less concern that there was de facto discrimination in our own backyard, and not just the community of Africville, which was a very, very impoverished community in the heart of Halifax that didn't enjoy the full benefits of citizenship, didn't enjoy full services from the city of Halifax. There also, are black urban fringe communities peppered throughout Nova Scotia on the outskirts of many small towns, as well as the Halifax-Dartmouth area. And we just felt that this should be something that we should interest ourselves in, learn more about. And so we started up a day camp in the community of Africville, which led to a lot of lasting relationships with not just kids who were only just slightly younger than we were, but with their parents and with the Baptist community in Africville.
So did you know then that this is what you wanted to do for your career?
I think I always had a sense that you just had a responsibility in life, particularly if you grew up with the advantages of loving parents and having your basic needs met, that you, as part of the community, as part of the human family, should be concerned about the human condition of people around you. And I don't think I defined it as an early age. Certainly saw it more as having to do with social work and community development than I did having to do with the realm of politics. As I became more actively involved in the social welfare field, focusing on social policy, on community development issues, I think I came to feel more and more that a lot of these problems cried out for the kind of intervention that a democratic society should be prepared to become engaged in, and that's how my interest in politics grew. That and the women's movement, frankly. In the early to mid 70s, I was a young parent. I became much more sensitized to issues of childcare, of inadequate employment opportunities for women, inadequate supports for women in the work world, and became quite politicized, really, through International Women's Year, through my involvement in women's organizations such as the YWCA, Voice of Women, and that also propelled me into politics and into the one political party that's always been the party that's broke down the barriers and pioneered for women on these issues.
Your kids say that you were still really present, despite the fact that your career and the politics took you away a lot, and they're very proud to say that you were always there for them. How hard was it for you to find that balance of being the politician and being a mom who's at home and there for her kids?
Well, my family have always been my anchor, my immediate family and my extended family. The biggest part of the struggle is there just aren't enough hours in the day, and it's very generous of my kids to recall that I was always there for them. I think when they say that, they mean emotionally, because they always knew I was there for them emotionally. Physically, sometimes I was absent, on special occasions, and I hated that. To be fair, however, in the earlier years, because I was a member of Parliament in Halifax, and Halifax is the capital where the provincial legislature is, then, there weren't the same challenges as there are for women in politics who either live on the opposite end of a province from where the legislature is, if they're in provincial politics, or even more challenging, live on the opposite end of the country. So, for me it was a kind of easy transition to enter federal politics and be elected as the federal leader in 1995, by which time my kids were fully grown up and independent. Now the challenge is to get home often enough to spend time with my granddaughter.
And we have a lovely picture of you and your granddaughter.
With me shamelessly showing her off.
In the swimsuit issue of Saturday Night. And were you caught off guard with how much you care for this little one?
I don't think anybody understands how thrilling it is to be a grandparent until they're actually a grandparent. In fact, when I look back on it, I feel slightly embarrassed that I used to think, I don't know why people talk so much about their grandchildren until you have one. And it is truly one of the great miracles of life. It's kind of the unfolding and mystery of life that makes it so exciting. You just can't quite get your head around how your kid can end up having a kid of their own.
And your son says that one of the first things you do when you get to Halifax is get off the plane and go visit her.
Yeah, whenever I can. Used to be easier to just arrive even halfway through the night, because when you're dealing with an infant, you can just get them out. Now that she's on a little more of a routine, you can't do that. On the other hand, I have a little more freedom to see her than I did for many years, so it seems to be all working out.
And you have another one on the way.
I do, yeah. Pretty excited about that too.
When you won the leadership in Nova Scotia, you were not only the only NDP member, but you were also the only woman. Tell me about those early years.
Well, there are lots of pretty funny stories to tell, some pretty outrageous stories. At the time when I was constantly encouraged to tell these stories about these terrible things that would happen, I really resisted it, because it made no sense to me to assume a kind of victim role when the whole point was to try to empower women and attract more women to public office. Some people also would treat this as though it was something very special, and I kept trying to say the only really special thing will be when there are roughly equal numbers of men and women. So in that sense, it just seemed to be a measure of how much work we had to do. But it's clear that there was no real conscious sense that this was a place where women should be equally represented or represented at all in the early years.
Is it true that they used to actually tell you that you should be home with your children and that you were neglecting them?
Well, occasionally someone would hurl an insult like that. But, you know, as much as you saw, you know, some of the worst aspects of male chauvinism, I always felt that it was a very privileged existence, because you more or less do your work in a fishbowl. You know, what you're doing is transparent, and you have a press gallery, at least some of whom are sensitized to these issues. So, you know, when there would be an outburst of some kind or other, it was more than hurtful or brutalizing. It was kind of a teachable moment, and often would result in whoever had hurled the insult providing really good fodder to get people thinking about how ridiculous this was. So I never took it personally, really. I just always was aware that there were an awful lot of women working in places of employment where they didn't have those kinds of protections of transparency, of accountability. And I used to joke about the fact that, sure, it's tough sometimes, but I even get equal pay. And of course, in those days, no such thing was true of most women, and still isn't. Lots of women. So it was more a question of it providing opportunities to try to sensitize people to how absurd this whole picture was in a democracy where women make up over 50% of the population, to have them not only so underrepresented, but so absent from the consideration of a lot of what gets debated here. And I guess that just underscored why I was there.
Is it true that there were no women's washrooms in the legislature or in the House of Assembly or near there?
Well, there was no washroom for any women members of the legislature, as there was for men. And again, some people said you should just demand a women's washroom. Well, my first reaction was, why would you spend the money for a washroom just for me? And besides, it became one of my touchstones with reality. It meant that I went downstairs, around the corner, underneath the stairs, and waited in line behind school kids that were there in classroom delegations or service clubs, often women who were very supportive, or tourists who wanted to know what was going on. So I kind of enjoyed escaping to a situation where there was a little more sisterhood and a little more sense that people actually cared about what I was doing there than if I'd been waiting in line for the men's washroom.
And did it progressively get better over those 4 years, because you were at it for 4 years alone?
You know, I don't know that it dramatically changed even when there were a couple more women. I think it still was very much a man's world. I think to this day, to a large extent, a lot of the issues that women are particularly concerned about, because they're not dealt with on, you know, the basis of real priorities, remain kind of marginalized in the world of male politics.
I think most people sort of divide the issues between the hard issues, business, commerce, economics, defense, and the so-called soft issues, which have to do with caring for the human family. And I think that's what motivates most women to go into politics. So we've still got a lot of work to do to change it. I would say I think it's improved somewhat because there are clearly more women than there used to be.
Now, one of your successes when you were in Nova Scotia was that you brought politics there. You changed the system from a two-party system to a three-party system. What are some of the other successes that you feel that you had while you were there?
Well, to be fair to my predecessors, I wasn't the first New Democrat elected to the Nova Scotia legislature. I was the first to be elected on the Nova Scotia mainland. There had actually been a very proud tradition coming out of the sort of working class struggle of the mines and the steel mill that had resulted in the election of some Democratic Socialists previously. But I was the first to be from the Nova Scotia mainland, and of course the first woman. And I think the fact of being a woman obviously influenced my commitment, and a lot of energy I put into health issues, to child care and elder care issues. Was very focused on human rights issues and workplace issues. And those remain really big priorities for me. Although I would say in my new life, as no longer the federal leader of the New Democratic Party, it feels like I have a whole new job, a new challenge in public policy areas where I had not previously had a lot of exposure or immersion: international development, foreign affairs, peace advocacy, and I'm loving that new job. It's like a stiff learning curve for me, but I'm enjoying the challenge.
And you sort of did things backwards, because normally people are critics before they're leaders, and for you were, for the most part of your 23 years in politics, you were a leader, and now you have a chance to sit back and
finally learn the job of being a full-time member. Pretty backwards way to do it, and I will acknowledge a tough way to do it. And I think in both cases the party really struggled with the question: does it make sense to elect a leader who doesn't have a seat? And I suppose there continue to be divisions of opinion on that. But it, was more a sort of accident of electoral circumstance that the party's fortunes were very low when I was elected as the leader in Nova Scotia. The same was true when I was elected federally. I think most people who know me know that I'm a builder, I'm a slogger, I'm stubborn, I'm persistent, and never found it to be a hopeless task at all, but rather just a great big challenge. Unfortunately, the pattern of women being elected to leadership positions is one that's quite pervasive, and that is that when a party's fortunes are low, or for that matter, when a particular riding is not considered winnable by a political party, then that party gives the nod quite often to women. If the party is looking like it's really on a roll, then the pattern, which is quite broadly established, is that it's men who get the nod. And I think women in all parties are still up against that. I'm proud of the fact that the New Democratic Party has worked hard to try to change that and has had some success in changing it, although I wouldn't say that it's completely absent from my own party.
Now we have 5 men who are leaders of the parties. Are we being robbed of a different kind of debate that would happen if there was at least one or perhaps 2 women at the helm of one of the parties?
I think most women regret, I certainly regret that with my having passed the torch to my successor, that there is no woman leader in Parliament today. But I don't think that, I don't think we should beat ourselves up about that. I think we should look at the reasons and keep trying to change them. Certainly the NDP has nothing to apologize for. We were the first party in this country where a woman contested federal leadership. Rosemary Brown, who went on to blaze many, many trails for women and for minority groups in this country. The first woman who was elected leader of a recognized party was myself in Nova Scotia, provincially. The first woman to be elected federally was a New Democrat, Audrey McLaughlin, to be the leader of the NDP. And not only that, it was a very tough time for the party, and she really had her hands full in that job for a number of reasons that had nothing to do with her being a woman. and yet the party didn't hesitate to elect a woman successor. I don't know there's another party that would do that in this country today. So we don't have anything to apologize for, but we've still got a lot more work to do to be able to say, yes, we elect men and women in roughly equal numbers, and they have equal access to leadership positions. I don't think that's quite true yet, so we've got to keep working at it.
Okay. We have to take a short break. We'll be back for more with Alexa McDonough. Stay with us. Welcome back to Public Life with Alexa McDonough. Some say that as a provincial leader, you were a lot tougher, or at least that's the impression that they have. What do you think of that?
I think that's probably true. I don't know what people mean exactly by tougher. I think I was a better provincial leader than I was a federal leader. You know, the times were tougher federally when I came to Ottawa. I had a lot more to learn. I mean, this is an immensely diverse country, and not just diverse geographically, but economically, politically, culturally, linguistically, ethnically. And so it was a very big challenge to find myself in the leadership position in this great, vast, diverse country at a time that the party's fortunes were low, their resources were very low, the numbers in Parliament were low, and there was certainly a right-wing grip on the politics of the nation. In addition to that, I hadn't been a member of Parliament previously, so I was trying to learn how to be a parliamentarian at the same time that I was trying to really learn the country. I say none of that to be defensive, because that's exactly what I knew I was taking on, and some people thought I was out of my mind. Do I have regrets about having done it? No regrets. Are there things I would like to have done differently? You bet. And with the benefit of hindsight, I hopefully would have done a lot of things better, but that's life.
What are some of those things that you would have done differently?
I think I would have taken more time to really know and understand Parliament better. I say that, and yet the reality is you don't get to participate in the same way as a leader as you do as a member of Parliament. And just the last 4 months of being a full-time member for me have been very, very satisfying. And I guess it just sort of underscores my feeling that it's a really good thing to try to get to know Parliament better from the beginning. I sort of hit the ground running, and largely what I was doing for the first couple of years was trying to rebuild the party from the ground up. My focus was not on Parliament at all. I was out across the country rebuilding, and I have no regrets about that. In the fact that we were able to make a breakthrough of 8 New Democrats elected from Atlantic Canada for the first time ever was not just a source of personal satisfaction. I think politically it was really important for the country, not just for the NDP, but for the country to be able to have an opposition party that literally had representation from coast to coast to coast. The only opposition party actually that could say that during those years. And I think we reflected it in who we were and what we did. It was tremendously satisfying to me that of the 16 new members elected to Parliament in '97, the election when I was able to lead the party into its kind of recovery stage, that we elected 8 men and 8 women. Now there were 5 incumbents re-elected, and I don't discount or dismiss that at all, but the fact is of 16 new members, it was exactly half men, half women. It was very satisfying because it showed in how we went about our work. I think it showed in terms of the balance that the whole caucus brought to the issues.
There's a huge potential for the NDP in the next election, given the right strategy. What do you think that strategy has to include for the NDP to increase its number of MPs across the country again?
Well, let me say I'm thrilled at how much people do recognize the tremendous potential for the NDP in the next election, and the potential for the country to stop being so divided, stop being so affected by parties that are very regional and parochial in some ways, and the fact that the NDP is a more national party than the other opposition parties. That's an important source of strength of the NDP. But I also think that people are recognizing that we've gone through that period of rebuilding, and that doesn't just mean numbers. I mean, and it doesn't just mean getting our finances under control. It means really having shaken ourselves up and taken a real hard look at who we were. And I'm proud to have led the party through that process of review and renewing itself. I just am absolutely thrilled that people see the potential in Jack Layton's leadership, and I think see the tremendous strength in the working relationship between the parliamentary leader and the elected party leader. I mean, Bill Blaikie, who is a superb parliamentarian, was a class act from, the day after the leadership convention when Jack Layton asked him to take on the role of parliamentary leader. And I think a lot of the strength in the party today is in that partnership. It's the newness, the freshness, the incredible energy and creativity that Jack Layton brings to it, but the kind of steadfastness and dogged persistence that Bill Blaikie represents and is reflected in, the caucus generally. But I think that partnership has been a real credit to both of Jack Layton and Bill Blaikie, and I think a credit to the party, because the party just swung in behind them, and it's quite satisfying, and I suppose this sounds a little perverse and more than a little partisan, to watch the other parties with these great big egos bashing up against each other and, tripping each other up and backstabbing and all the rest of it, while the NDP caucus is just hard at work doing what we said we would be doing under renewed leadership and on a really solid team basis. I think Canadians are pretty cynical about politics these days, and if we can do one thing in the next election, renew people's sense that you can actually make politics count again and have your own hopes and dreams and aspirations represented in something other than a cynical, self-serving way, then I think democracy will be better served, and the New Democratic Party will deserve a good deal of credit for that.
When you chose to step down, some said that you should have waited until those big egos had sorted out their feud, and many applauded you for the timing. When you look back on it, would you change anything, or?
Don't have a single regret. Not a single regret about deciding to pass the torch, and no regrets whatsoever about the timing. I actually feel that one of the better decisions I ever made was to step down when I stepped down in Nova Scotia, and it was thrilling for me to see the party go to official opposition, almost to government in the last election, and I think can very possibly make that final step in the upcoming Nova Scotia election. And federally, I feel a little bit the same way about it. I think the potential is enormous. I really believe in how positive an experience a change in leadership can be. I don't think the other parties have demonstrated that very well, because it didn't have enough to do with what is it we're here for in those other parties. It really did have to do with a lot of pettiness and jockeying for power and so on. I think it's fair to say that our timing was really good. That having a new leader in place by this time has provided for the party to renew itself, has provided for the new leader to really get out across the country and build on his solid, not just municipal experience, but his national experience previously as president of the Canadian Federation of Municipalities. And we're just ready to roll. I mean, if there were an election tomorrow, I think we're better prepared, not that I'm expecting that's going to happen, but we're in better shape to run that election than any of the other parties. So I'm pretty excited about that. I also think that a leadership shift can either be a disastrous experience, and we've seen several of those in the last couple of years, or it can be a really positive experience. And I think in the case of the NDP transition, that it's been a positive experience. I think the synergy that comes from new leadership working with veterans and some of the newer members and so on can be really positive, and I think it has been. So, do I have any regrets? None whatsoever. From the day I made the decision, I felt good about it. I never second-guessed it after that, and I realized that it was not appropriate for me to have any role in the selection of the new leader, nor did I in any way. But to end up with, the first and second place contenders in such a solid partnership and working relationship was really a dream come true.
So did you give any thought to quitting politics completely, or was it none? You knew?
Maybe partly because I've never had the challenge of being a full-time member and really engaged in some critic areas where you can really concentrate your energies, bring your political experience to bear in a more concentrated way. It's one of the reasons why I'm really attracted to continue. Secondly, I'm a fervently passionate maritimer, and I care a lot about my own community, and I'd love to have a chance to pour more of my heart and soul into really working to build in my own community in a way, quite frankly, you don't get to do as the federal leader. I don't think anybody would say that I've ever neglected my responsibilities as a full-time member. I've always, as the federal leader, I've always had incredibly committed staff, volunteers, executive members who've all, been there helping to maintain my presence in the riding. But I look forward to just spending more time in Halifax, closer to home, closer to my family and my constituents. And if I'm elected, which I will fight hard to be, but that'll be up to my constituents, then I really look forward to carrying on.
And if re-election was not an issue, how long would you continue in political life?
Oh, who knows?
Ideally.
Who knows? As long as my constituents will have me, or to the point where, if I had any sense that I don't have a lot of new energy, new ideas to contribute, then I'd better step aside and make room for somebody else. But at the moment, I don't have any thoughts about when would I be feeling it was time to step down. I just know now I'm really excited at the possibility of continuing to serve, and that's what I'm going to work hard to try to achieve in the next election.
Journalists have often said that it was difficult to get an 8 or 10 or even 30-second clip from you because you always wanted to look at the whole picture. And was that something that was intentional on your part? Because it's sort of a catch-22. If you don't give them what they want, then you're not part of the story. So was it something that you consciously did?
No, not at all. You've really touched on what was probably my single greatest frustration. It didn't ever seem to be a problem in Nova Scotia in the sense that there wasn't the same kind of gotcha politics mentality. There wasn't, I think we were living more through a period when there was such a thing as a 30-second clip, or, the 2 opening paragraphs of a news account. Now it's kind of down to 3 to 5-second clips, and maybe the catchword that ends up in the title. I mean, we've really dumbed down our whole notion of public policy in ways that I think are problematic. But let me freely admit that was one of my biggest challenges. I found it very difficult to do that well, and that's a problem. One of the reasons, frankly, why I think both Jack Layton and Bill Blakey do a terrific job in the media is because they have a much better capacity to kind of reduce the point to a few words, and in particularly an age where television dominates the media and is the main way most people get their information. That's a pretty valuable skill. Regrettably, it was never one of my strong suits.
We have to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Alexa McDonough. Welcome back to Public Life with Alexa McDonough. On some of the issues, how happy were you with the Romano report?
Oh, overwhelmingly happy with the Romano report. I mean, I think the only limitations in the Romano report, not that I want to suggest he walks on water, but I think, he did a brilliant job with the report. The only limitations were imposed by 2 things really outside of his control. One was that the mandate was too narrow, in my view. I think there should have been more, even broader terms for that report that would have given even more attention to things like the social and economic determinants of ill health. But the mandate that he was given was not as broad as it should have been, in my view. And secondly, I think he brought to bear his very considerable seasoned judgment about what was doable. I think he knew and understood, the limited vision of this government. I'm not sure he would say it that way, but I think that's what he did. He read the political dynamics of the situation, and I think he brought in recommendations that were absolutely attainable, without a doubt. I mean, he's always been a real fiscal fox, a fiscal conservative. He made recommendations that were absolutely doable. I think one of the genuine tragedies for Canadians, and I suspect a real source of frustration for him, is that the government has chosen to cherry pick that report in a way that destroys the integrity of it. I mean, he didn't make a single recommendation that wasn't very well researched, very well documented, very achievable, and it must be very disappointing for him. And I think it's a tragedy for Canadians that the government hasn't moved forward with the main guts of that commission.
So you think that there may not be the political will to make it all happen?
Oh, it's not a question of may not. There isn't. I mean, clearly there isn't. They needed to move on the recommendations about the restoration of funds because the continuing erosion is just a huge problem. I think the failure to put in place a proper council, a Canadian Health Council, completely misses the point of his trying to argue that Canadians are just sick and tired of the federal-provincial battles, and they want health dealt with, and they want it dealt with in a collaborative way. And I think he paved the way. I think he proposed a structure that would allow that to happen if the political will was there, but it's clearly not. I think there are other areas in which he didn't go as far as I would have liked, some others would have liked, but I think he also, read accurately how limited the political will was. I think taking on the multinational pharmaceutical companies is a critical part of what we need to do. He recommended incremental changes, actually fairly small changes. The government hasn't touched them. I don't think he dealt as extensively with some of the issues affecting seniors as he might have. And I know that's disappointing for some seniors because in many cases people look at their own difficult circumstances and see nothing but decline in the years ahead, and they're not wrong about that. I think he cares passionately about those issues, but I think he was trying to deal with the art of what he saw as possible with this Liberal government that has such limited vision.
Your role now is less argumentative and less confrontational and more cooperative. As foreign critic, you're able to talk through the issues, you're able to work through consensus building, and that really is more your style. So how happy are you doing that?
I'm thrilled doing it. It shows all over that it's a more comfortable milieu for me. I think it's not a question so much of, there aren't situations in which you're going to be confronting, you darn well are going to be confronting the Prime Minister or the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Defense Minister, International Development Minister, as it relates to my critic areas, around things that you're pushing the government to do. But a lot of the work that I engage in has a great deal to do with working with NGOs, civil society, community groups to try to build consensus, build momentum around progressive solutions at a committee level. One of the things I aim for is to try to help build consensus and achieve a higher degree of understanding to then hopefully reflect that in recommendations that go from committees to the government. And I find that a lot more satisfying. I've also been involved in initiating a number of symposia, roundtables, consensus building kinds of exercises, and that's just way more comfortable to me than the confrontational kind of role that a party leader inevitably is involved in a democratic society.
Peace activism is something that you're interested in now, and you recently took a trip to the Middle East, to Israel and Palestine. What did you take back from that trip?
Oh, a lot of things. I have to say it was a life-changing experience for me in many ways. I thought I was prepared for what I was going to see. One of the things that I came back from that trip to the Middle East believing very, very strongly in is how much we have to build understanding here in our own backyard, within our own Canadian family, building on the experiences and the insights of people who bring that background to bear, from the Middle East. I think we have to work a lot harder through every possible means to build better cross-cultural understanding, more interfaith kind of collaboration. And I actually think that Canada is only going to really live up to its billing as a peace builder, a peace seeker, a peacemaker, if we're going to do a better job right here in our own backyard of building tolerance and understanding and mutual respect. And I think in that regard, it's heartbreaking how much Canada has fallen short of fulfilling that role, both here at home and abroad. Again and again and again, we were hearing in the Middle East how disappointing it was to people that Canada seems to have just become an appendage to the U.S. and Bush's foreign policy. I know there are exceptions, and I'm proud of those, and I think Canadians deserve a lot of credit, and I think the NDP deserves some of the credit too, for helping to keep the pressure on for us to exercise our Canadian sovereignty as a proud nation with values that people hold dear. But I think it's almost universally felt that Canada no longer really displays the kind of proactive leadership in the international arena that people respected in the past, that Canadians were proud of, and that people still in many parts of the world really want to see Canada playing. And I think that's a big part of what we got to do. I don't think we respect ourselves anymore as a nation the way that we used to, and the way Canadians want us to. So I think we got our work cut out for us on that front.
And the war in Iraq for you was a huge, huge disappointment in terms of the U.S. being at war and to some extent, I guess, the position that Canada took.
Well, I think that one of the truly horrifying things that's happened in the last couple of decades is the Bush foreign policy doctrine. I mean, really, the new position which thumbs its nose at multilateralism, which basically says we'll tear up very important treaties and we'll go it alone, we'll engage in preemptive strikes if we want, we'll ignore the anti-ballistic missile treaty or thumb our nose at nuclear proliferation treaties. I mean, this is truly terrifying for the world because we have this massive superpower who also happens to be, representing the people who live next to us. I don't think it represents the view of most Americans, frankly. And I think if you could take a poll today and ask Americans, do they think that the Bush administration should barge ahead and invade Iraq, now that we know there were no weapons of mass destruction, now that we actually understand that we were sold a bill of goods. I mean, a lot of people in the U.S. actually thought, when asked if they approved of invading Iraq, that weapons of mass destruction not only existed in Iraq, but were being used against who? I'm not sure. I mean, if people really had an opportunity to make that choice based on the facts, I think you'd find a very different reading. Meanwhile, Canada has a big challenge, how to deal with the Bush administration, because there it is, representing the government of our closest trading partners and our closest neighbors, while we also try to remain true to our own Canadian values. It's a big challenge, no question about it.
And on a personal note, your life has changed since you've stepped down from the leadership. I know that your kids talk about the fact that you love to do activities, physical activities, and play racquetball and play tennis and do things for yourself. Do you find that you have more time to do that now?
I'd be lying if I told you I'd found a lot more time. I think the potential to find more time to do that is there. So far, I would say I've been every bit as busy as I ever was, but with way less pressure, and that's good enough for me in the short term. In the medium term, I'd like to get a little better balance in my life, no question. But everybody who's close to me, everybody in my family would say that I'm kind of married to my politics, and that's a big, takes a big chunk out of my life, which I make a conscious decision to make that a priority. In the time ahead, I think I will find more balance by being more grounded in my own community and my own constituency, and hopefully a lot more time for family.
I know that the sense of family is very important to you, and David, your partner, you've had a big influence on him, I guess, in his on the political side. He was a Tory, a long-time Tory, and after having met you, changed and became an NDP.
Not true. Not true. Some people try to credit me with having changed his politics. Not true. He was always a red Tory, a very progressive Tory, always strained against the conservatizing side of the PC party. And he had made a decision to become involved in working for the NDP before I ever met the guy. So, I'd love to take the credit for bringing it about, but everybody who knows him, when he actually announced he was seeking an NDP nomination in '97 in the riding he had represented previously as a Tory, said, I knew he'd do that someday. Always knew that he really belonged in the Social Democratic family. So I could try to take the credit, but it just wouldn't be true.
How has he influenced your life?
Well, it's been tremendously helpful to me for him to have a lot of parliamentary experience to bring to bear on situations. Sometimes I'm not as good a listener as I should be, because often he said, I don't know, but if I were you, I'd, look at it this way, and I'd sort of resist that, saying, well, I got to come to my own conclusions, and sometimes say, well, it's really different from when you were there, but really, most often, he's had very, very good advice. And yet he's always been sensitive about giving advice, because he knows human nature really well. He raised 4 wonderful kids, and he knows people have to kind of learn their own way. So it's always a delicate balance. But we've had a lot of fun together, doing politics together, because we both live and breathe and eat politics. And it's got a downside. I mean, the problem is that even when we have leisure time, we still do politics most of the time. And probably both need a bit of a kick in the ass to get some better balance in our lives.
You do like to have fun, and one of the clips that we have is this hour's 22 minutes of you doing the sleepover party.
Watch out for your bag there. At the second welcome. Oh my God, Deborah, you look gorgeous with a few rollers in your hair. Why don't you wear those in the house? And Lex, of course, you're perfect.
I thought she did.
How fun was that to do?
Well, it's always fun to be part of this hour's 22 minutes, but I have to say, even more fun than those sleep parties for me was ambushing Rick Mercer when he was doing his book launch here in Ottawa. I always felt kind of crummy about it, because he got a really bum rap from, I think, a really unfair journalist who said, well, he can dish out the humor, but he doesn't seem to have a sense of humor. I mean, how damaging is that? And besides, it wasn't true. I mean, he was shocked. He was like totally taken aback, even speechless briefly, which is hard to imagine Rick Mercer being speechless. But as soon as he figured out what was happening, he was a screaming riot, and he was a great sport.
Great.
Hey, you Rick Mercer?
I'm
Alexa McDonough.
Hi, Alexa.
Welcome to Ottawa. Nice to see
I'm
you in
being
town.
ambushed. Have you ever written a book?
How, in the name of heavens, can you ask 1995 for this book? And you have the nerve to criticize us for what we do over there in Parliament here.
1995, eh?
What's the Canadian dream? A 2-4, a 4x4, and a job in the Department of Fisheries.
That is a great
Come
Canadian
on, Rick,
dream.
come clean, tell the truth. Your application for an NDP membership was rejected. See, right there. Rejected.
It was one of those sort of gimmicky things that my chief of staff and I dreamed up on the spur of the moment. We had a riot doing it. In the short term, it wasn't so great for him, but true to form, he's always been a great sport about it.
What career would you have chosen if not social work or politics?
I don't think of myself as having chosen a political career. In fact, I don't think that's a good reason for people entering politics. I often get asked that question by young people, and I strongly urge people against choosing a political career. Someone says to me, I've decided I really want to be Prime Minister. I kind of think, well, that's the wrong reason. I think what people should do is decide what they really care passionately about and chase their dreams. And after they've really gotten immersed in something that they care a lot about, if they see the need for changes in public policy that would make it better, then get involved in the political arena. But don't make a choice to be a career politician, because I think that's the wrong way to go about it. The only other thing I almost did, and I do sometimes think, gee, I would have loved that, is do journalism. I worked as a newspaper reporter through university, summer jobs. I applied for journalism school. I was serious about doing it. I decided to do social work first and then do the journalism.
What do you have left to do in politics?
Oh, I just see no end of things worth doing. I think there are so many things that Canadians want to see happen differently.
Want to do?
Well, I'm really excited about playing a role in the realm of international development issues and foreign policy issues. Issues of peace and disarmament are just huge. Maybe it's being a grandmother, maybe it's really looking ahead 2 generations that you start to be even more concerned. I actually think we've got to work to create a world without war, not just the notion that we have some kind of treaties that constrain the escalation of armaments, but I think we've got to, first of all, begin imagining a world without war and figure out how to work towards it. Because the potential is here to destroy the human planet and the human race, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to do that. I think there needs to be a much bigger role for the arts in carving out our future. I think it really is about the soul of the nation. I think that artists have a way of getting to the truth and helping people to believe that they can fulfill their hopes and dreams and aspirations. So that's half of what it means to be a nation in charge of your future. And I think that this government doesn't get that. I think the existence of this National Arts Centre is a symbol of that, but I think all over this country we need to be taking more seriously the need to support our artists, our poets, our playwrights, our musicians. I think we'll find that that's a really important investment in the kind of future that we want to have.
Great. It's been a real pleasure, and I thank you very much, Alexa.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. What a pleasant way to spend an afternoon.